Recording in progress. Okay, recording in progress. All right, anybody didn't have a chance yet to make a bracha? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyeh b'ro. If you want some l'chaim, we do have some other.
Yes, right here.
Some scotch, anybody?
Anybody? Get warmed up a bit?
No? It's too hot outside today?
No. It's a little cold outside.
Larry, I think it has your name.
Too tired out today?
Well, I mean, I brought it, so.
Want some? Can we give you some?
No.
No? Just like that.
Give me and drink it.
And you're worried about, if the chef doesn't eat their food, you kind of get worried some, no? Something like that? For all the years I spent in the kitchen.
Unless I drink them already.
Is that how it works? Okay, we are up to chapter 3 on page 39. Questions of identity. Anybody have any identity issues here?
I think we all have.
Perfect. Okay, great. It's the right class. So what we're going to address essentially in this chapter is the concept of self-identity. In other words, what makes me an identifiably different entity than anything else in this world?
Say that one more time.
Should have some of that scotch. What makes me a different identifiably entity? In other words, what makes me any different as an entity than anything else in this world? What identifies me, or you for that matter, or anything for that matter, as an independent entity and not part of something else that just gets gobbled up into whatever it may be? So if you remember going back a little bit in Tanya, we spoke about the fact that ultimately God created the entire world. And in essence, really, the entire world is like absolute nothingness relative to God. So if we're all absolute nothingness, then why are we even here? In God's eyes, if the whole universe is like absolute nothingness, so what's the purpose of my being nothingness or nothing over here? Why did God create me if I'm nothingness to him or anything else in this world?
He wants to have a relationship with us.
Individually.
We're not in nothingness to him.
We all have a role.
That's true.
And individually, he created individual
There will
souls.
only be one of us.
He did. That's all true. But at the same time, if the whole universe is in reality on some level, like absolute nothingness to God, right? Because God is infinite, God is everything, God is omnipotent, God is omniscient, God, all the omnis, and ultimately I'm this small little I'm like a speck sort of on this huge mosaic, if you will, of God that's called the universe. And in truth, God doesn't really need the universe. Does he need the universe? Was God like lonely beforehand that he decided, you know what, I need solace in my life, so I'm going to create people who don't listen to me, okay? Give me a hard time. When I ask them to do something, they don't do it. Or when I ask them not to do something, they do it. And that's, kind of sums up much of history in the last 5,786 years. So who and what are we? And what makes us sort of like unique or identifiable if in reality we're all part of this huge, like sort of, I was going to say mishkababel. That's a scientific term for you, okay? And so in this godly world of Or Ein Sof, the infinite level of godly light. So what makes me an individual? Or you an individual? Or this a table and not a chair? Or this a chair and not a bookcase, etc. So with that, chapter 3 approaches the idea of continual creation from a different angle. Remember we spoke about the fact, it was in the last chapter, I know it's been a few weeks, how ultimately when Hashem created the world, his words that were used for creation, let's say the 10 utterances or other manifestations of God's speech, are constant. So it's not like God just once said 5,786 and a half years ago, let there be light, and therefore there's light. And it's over. Like God took a step back and said, light, Mr. Sun, or Miss Sun, or whatever it is, okay? Non-binary sun, I'm putting you up there. Every morning I want you to rise in the east and set in the west, and don't ask questions. And no, you don't get a day of vacation. That's basically the work package. Okay, there's no retirement, and there's no options out. It's not like God said, I understand you're working really hard for a long time. Imagine working for thousands of years, every day, the same, pretty much. All right, and always rise. Didn't you get bored of doing the same thing again and again and again and again, thousands and thousands of times? Once in a while, you want to try something a little different, and yet still it's not an option. Why? Because it wasn't like God said this saying, this utterance, and took a step back and let Mother Nature take over. It's constantly being said, quote unquote, and thus constantly vivifying or animating. In this case, let's say it's the sun or whatever it may be, or any other aspect of creation. So with that, we're going to go straight to the chapter itself, page 39. After hearing these true words from Chronicles, everyone who looks into the matter will thoroughly understand that how every created entity is genuinely and literally considered null and void. That means that we are nada. Okay? And not only that, he says, who we null and void to, in relation to the causal power of God and breath of his mouth. We talk about causal as the concept of cause and effect, right? So you have a cause, and then thereafter there's an effect. When the effect is still within the cause, is the effect any different than the cause? Before the effect happens, remember the cause causes the effect to happen. But before the effect happens, meaning potential, I guess the effect exists there, but is it identifiable within the cause? I didn't say it was going to be an easy class. I'll make you work. Huh? Too much thinking at 7:30 at night? Can you? That's all right. Here, argue. Make it simple. Here's the cause. Here's the effect.
If you do something because you're anticipating the effect.
You can anticipate anything you want. That's true. But let's assume here's the cause. Here's the effect. Do you see this effect anywhere in here?
No.
No, you don't, right? Even though ultimately somehow this is the cause.
Right.
I mean, obviously it looks a little different on a napkin and glasses, but nonetheless. So bearing that in mind, so what is this cause? The breath of God's mouth from the book of Psalms, within the effect of creation, the causal power which continually brings all created beings entities into being, and takes them out from absolute nothingness to become something. In other words, there's a level of godliness up here. That's the cause of everything. And somehow within this cause, the entire universe exists. Even though you can't identify anything within that cause, that you can say, oh, I got it. So this part of the universe came from here, that came from there, etc. You wouldn't see anything. Why? Because relative to this, all of that effect is like absolute nothingness. Is it starting to resonate a little? The synapse is firing a little bit? Okay. Page 40. So ultimately, we are utterly dependent on the causal power. So our existence has no independence at all from the power that is really just an expression of it. But if we are null and void, why does it not seem that way? Why does it appear very much that case that we do enjoy an independent existence? In other words, if I know that, remember, this is the cause of everything, and I'm part of this, let's say over here, and somehow I know that I come from here. In my head, I come from there. But over here, this relative to this up here looks at this like absolute nothingness. So the question is, why do I perceive myself as an identity, as a pair of glasses here, but somehow in my cause up there, I'm nothing. I'm like absolute nothingness. Seems to be a bit of a contradiction of terms. How can I view myself or ourselves or anything as, this is the effect, as an identifiable object in this case, or person, while in my source, where I ultimately come from, the cause up here, I'm like absolute nothingness. One more time for points.
Please.
Did we get the question?
Yes.
This is the cause. This is infinite light of God. This is the effect down here, us, we, our universe, and what have you. In my mind, the universe exists where I look around and I see in this room different people, different bookcases, different objects, lights, what have you. I don't know how many things are in this room. Hundreds, if not more, in this one room alone. Okay, if I sat there and identified each thing individually. Yet still in all, to my cause, which is Or Ein Sof, the infinite level of light of God, all of everything here is like absolute nothingness. So how do the two work together? How can I be something in my eyes and yet my cause views me as being absolutely nothing?
Just because of Hashem. He's the one.
True,
He's
but-
the only person that keeps it going. If he decides to just stop, everything vanishes. Everything becomes nothing.
That's true. You're right. So so we ended last chapter with that notion. But at the same time, bearing that in mind still, even though, yes, Hashem constantly energizes and animates everything in creation consistently, why does the world still look like absolute nothingness to Hashem?
You have the cause right here. You have the effect, like you say, on the bottom. The way I see it, how you identify ourselves to this cause. I mean, we directly connect ourselves to this cause because we power the effect. Therefore, every single particle you were saying, every single book, every single table, it belongs to this cause right here. So I will identify myself as part of that cause.
Okay, very good. We're making a lot of progress.
Right.
So hold that thought. Okay. Somebody's been paying attention in class. All right, back to page 40. And that's for the fact that every created thing appears to us as real and substantial, right? This is a real table. We're real people and not null and void. What's the problem? That is only because we fail to grasp and tangibly see the power of God, the breath of his mouth, and every created being. So, Yosef, what you said is true, right? And we believe that to be the case. That what is my lifeline? What is everybody's lifeline? Hashem.
Yes.
But do I see that tangibly? Do I see that visibly? In other words, can I tangibly touch it? Say, sort of like there's this extension cord between myself and God. I don't know if you ever, if you take a rope that could be 100 feet long, let's say, or longer, it could be 1,000 feet, and you're at the bottom of it, and you go like this. It'll take time, but eventually at the top's going to shake. Okay, you can sort of watch it. It's easy to do with the rope. Actually, many years ago, I went, what do they call it? Parasailing. Okay, so if you ever been parasailing, you haven't, it's a good time to start, you know what I mean? It's not that bad, okay? It's fun. So it's a little nerve-wracking initially when you get off the boat and you start flying up 200 feet into the air, okay? Once you're up there, it's very serene. Because you don't feel the speed of the boat. It's not going that fast, ultimately, but fast enough to keep the parachute going. And it's serene, it's quiet, and you can see for probably miles, whatever it may be. But then, of course, the guy who was running the boat had to go like this to my rope to make sure I shouldn't be too comfortable up there. And before you know it, I'm shaking, and there's nothing you can do. You're stuck up there. Okay? But so it works. So ultimately, but that's a cause and effect, right? He was the cause. He went like this. The effect was about, 10 seconds later, I'm shaking like a madman, where otherwise I was enjoying myself very serenely. I don't remember paying for that part of the ride, but I guess it was an extra bonus. Okay, so obviously the physical eye can't see something spiritual. So why does Tanya entertain the possibility here? The Tanya's view is that your reality is determined by your consciousness. You can accept what your senses tell you, right? Taste, smell, touch, etc. That the physical world is substantial and enjoys independent existence. Or you can choose for your reality to be determined by the conclusions of your mind. In other words, you can decide, you can either say, I'm going to live my life experiential through the experiences, right? Using my various different senses, whether it's, again, touch, smell, taste, hearing, whatever it may be. Or I can decide, I'm not using any of that. I'm going to decide in my mind how my relationship is going to be with the world. It may have nothing to do with the reality. I can make my own reality. You never met anybody who creates their own realities? They exist, okay? They live in their own world. It's like, we don't necessarily, you start to wonder how we all live on the same planet. We're doing the same thing, and they're living it completely differently than everyone else. So if over a period of time you contemplate the idea that God creates the world constantly, and that the universe enjoys no independent existence, after a while, that becomes your truth. In other words, as Yosef mentioned, I start to think constantly that my existence, and therefore every other of the trillion or whatever it is, things that exist in this world, are all part of this connection to Hashem, and they all have this invisible line, if you will, of energy that's coming down and animating it with the exact amount of voltage or whatever it may be, amps, that thing needs, spiritual amps that is, to be able to exist. And I start to think this way, and I start to create, this becomes my reality in my mind. which I have a choice to do. But I mean, it may not come naturally because it's not natural to believe strongly, if you will, in something that you can't see, you can't physically experience. If you could see God's creative power, you would see how the world's separate identity is completely voided by the spiritual energy in it. I'll explain that in a second. Because without that spiritual energy, the created being would be absolutely null and void, exactly as it was before the 6 days of creation. In other words, if I was able to see, literally with my sight, or tangibly somehow feel or experience the absolute amount of godliness that exists within me, I would become like absolute nothingness. The difference is I just don't feel it. I mean, I know in concept that God exists and I believe in Hashem and all those good things. But as much as I know, it's barely the tip of the iceberg of what's really in me, the level of godliness in me or in anything that's animating it. As spiritual a person may be, they can only get to a certain point, and it's really almost like nothing relative to what really exists and animates them spiritually. I just read that. Did I not? See this over here with my glasses on. Yeah. In reality, the spiritual energy which flows to each created identity or entity from the utterance of God's mouth and the breath of his mouth is the exclusive power that transforms it constantly from null and void into something, bringing it into being, and this being the case, there's no true existence other than God. In other words, just for a moment, God decides, you know what? I created you, I animated you, I made this beautiful universe, everything that exists in it. But I'm taking a step back, not for a long time, for a millisecond. I was going to catch my breath. What would happen? Everything would revert to absolute nothingness. All the physicality that we see, not only the physical worlds, even the spiritual worlds that exist, Atzilos, Bri, Atzilos, whatever it may be, will return to absolute nothingness as it was prior to creation. Even though we don't necessarily see it in an overt way. So he explains the Devarim paragraph. Scholars have described this view as panentheism, literally all in God. It's not that you don't exist. You just don't exist like you think you do. This is a little philosophical in case you needed some help with that. Okay? You are really something that happens within God, like a ripple on the sea of the divine. So, yeah, in my world, I exist. That's the way I relate, if you will. But ultimately, I don't exist in truth the way I think I really exist. I have a certain perception of my existence, like everybody does, or the existence of the world. But it's not truly the way it is. It's my perception, which again is a very limited perception. God has the amazing peripheral vision. He can see everything all at once, past, present, and future. It's all there for the taking. We have very limited peripheral vision. Okay, not just physically where you can see this, X amount of angles or degrees outside of your straight line of vision, but in general, our peripheral vision of the world is very small. It's a huge universe. It's like a person who grew up in a shtetl and never left a shtetl. Okay, and you explain to them, there's these islands in the Pacific. They're called Hawaii, and there's Maui, and they're looking at you like, you fella, what are you talking about? There's no such thing. There's goats, and there's some sheep, and there's a cow, and there's a barn. And we have a baker. What are you talking about? Islands like this? I mean, to them, it's like it's fantasy, fantasia. Why? Because they've never been outside that. Assuming they've never been outside that shtetl, and they never learned about anything outside that shtetl. Their whole life is that shtetl. And there were such people that lived that way, right? Mm-hmm. Nowadays, the world is a much smaller place, ultimately, because first and foremost, people travel far more than they ever did. Mm-hmm. And ultimately through, let's say, the advent of the internet and AI, which will tell you things that you never knew existed before, right? All of a sudden, everything's at my fingertips. I can sort of either vicariously or directly experience things that many of my ancestors 100 years ago couldn't do, couldn't dream of doing, or didn't even know existed. All right, section 2, a physical illustration of panentheism. Sorry? Question from the audience. Shtetl is Yiddish. It's like a little village.
Little village?
Village, like a small little village. in Europe, well, probably not just in Europe, but let's say Eastern Europe, in particular, Eastern Europe back in the day, 100 plus years ago, many of the Jews lived in these very small little cloistered towns. They didn't live in the big cities. They weren't allowed to live in the big cities.
Ever seen Hitler on the Roof? Movie? That's a show.
They weren't allowed to live in the big cities
Right.
because of anti-Semitism. So they were sort of forced out to live out in the boonies, basically. Okay, literally, that's what it was. So they had these many of them were just small towns. Everybody knew each other. You either were related to everybody or you knew everybody. You probably were related because invariably many of them just married other shtetlites, of their own shtetlach. And that's the way life went on for generation after generation. It wasn't like it happened once. All right. So since the notion of page 42, since the notion of our existence being null and void is counterintuitive, it doesn't make sense. If I'm here and I'm talking to you, then obviously I can't be null and void, and you're ostensibly listening, right? So, and a radical departure from ordinary consciousness, the Tanya will devote the rest of this chapter to making the idea more relatable with a physical illustration. It's going to give us a mashal, a parable. And that is, a mashal is a physical illustration of this. So it says a physical illustration of this is from the sunlight which shines on the earth and its inhabitants. This is from the blessing we say in the morning, or before Shema. Light rays which have emerged from the globe of the sun, the orb of the sun, and they are visible to everybody shining on the earth and in the atmosphere. So he explains that, well, first and foremost, how far away do you think the sun is from planet Earth? Far. How far would far be to you? What would you guess?
400,000 miles.
400,000 miles. Anyone else?
Further.
It's actually 93 million miles away on average. Okay, it changes based. That's an average between like 91 and 94, but it's about 93 million miles away. It's pretty far. So, and how long do you think it takes sunlight to get here from the sun? Remember, it's traveling at the speed of light. It's over 8 minutes, like 8 minutes, 20 seconds or 40 seconds, something like that, from when the sunlight, the rays, leave the sun until it gets to planet Earth. It takes over 8 minutes to travel that 93 million miles. Okay, so I just give you some perspective. Now, back to the Tanya. Obviously, these light rays are also found inside the physical globe of the sun itself, the rays down here. The globe that we see in the sky, or the orb, for if the light rays can spread out and shine at such a distance to reach the earth, they can certainly shine in their own locality. Only there in their own locality, inside the orb or globe of the sun, one ray is considered completely null and void. So in short, here's your orb of the sun, 93 million miles from here. Within that orb, which is made up of gases and whatever it may be, that's not a solid, but nonetheless, inside that orb is ultimately the potentia, or ultimately every single ray of light, of sunlight that comes down to this planet, comes down to the world at large, right? They emanate from there. But is there a way of identifying one ray of sunlight from another while it's still in the orbit of the sun? You can't. They're all there. They exist in some way, shape, or form because they come from there. But they're not identifiable. Each ray in and of itself, practically speaking, is like null and void relative to the actual orbit of the sun itself. I don't know how many rays, I don't know exactly how they'd identify what a ray of sunlight is in terms of its spectrum or whatnot, but I don't know how many rays come down to the world either, but it's a lot, whatever it may be. And what we get down on planet Earth, 93 million miles away, is like a little relatively speaking, if you were to travel, listen, if you climb the tallest mountain in the world, Mount Everest, right? Or the tallest mountain in North America is Mount McKinley, or I think they'd be named it to Mount Denali or whatever it may be, in Alaska. It's the tallest mountain in North America. Okay, so let's say you're up at a little under 30,000 feet. When you fly in a plane, most planes fly higher than 30,000 feet. Okay, so you say, okay, it's not that. But you look down, you can still see planet Earth. At 30,000 feet, you cannot see the curvature of the Earth. It just looks flat or it looks cloudy or whatever you're looking at, okay? That's what it is. Not that exciting, ultimately. But what ends up happening is that when you, let's say you burn easily, like myself, you're a little more fair skinned. So anybody who's gone skiing knows that if you're up, first of all, you're only up at, let's say, 8 or 10,000 feet. You're going to burn more easily because you're higher up. B, also the reflection of the snow. You think it's cold. Most people don't equate sunburn with cold. If it's cold and there's snow, how can I get sunburned? Well, you can get really badly sunburned, okay? Just doing that. But when you climb even higher, right, you get higher up into our atmosphere and the like, the sunlight becomes stronger and stronger. Okay, that's why. So, and then obviously you get to 30,000 feet or 100. I mean, once you're over, I don't know, it's like 100,000 feet where things are black at that point. I forgot exactly where the line is, but it's somewhere in that neck of the woods. Roughly at about 100,000 feet, when you look up at the sky, it's all black. And you look down and you see planet Earth. But at that point, you're looking at a globe more so than just the planet as we see it. Okay, now we finished with our science lesson. Thank you, class.
We not only learn Tanya, we're learning also
Whatever I remember from school, right?
Well, like 45 minutes trying to come from over.
But we're not done yet. Hold on. Okay, so now going back to the text itself. So one ray, one ray of light is null and void in the sun's globe since its identity is voided by the sun's globe, which is the source of that light ray. Page 43. The light ray has no identity within its source. Like in the orbit of the sun, you can't separate one ray from another. Or in logical terms, an effect has no identity while it is still within its cause. My original question to you. So the cause we know is there, but you can't identify the effects in it until it comes out from the cause. Because the light ray is merely an effect of the sun, being nothing other than light shining from the actual globe of the sun, which is its cause. So if you were to, for example, cover yourself with something above your head that's really dark and heavy, would the sunlight pierce through that cover? Not really. If it's dark, if it's you're in your house, say for argument's sake, you have a roof over your head, okay, and it's blocking the sunlight from coming down. So at that point, it stops the sunlight from coming directly onto you. Does that actually change the ray of the sun? No. The ray of the sun is still there, even though you don't see it, you don't feel it, doesn't bother you, whatever it may be. But ultimately, that ray that's coming from the sun is just an effect of that sun. It's not the sun itself. We couldn't handle the orbit of the sun itself on our planet. Any closer than it is, we basically burn up. Only in the Earth's atmosphere under the skies, quote, and on Earth itself, so on the Earth itself, where the sun's globe, the cause, is not present, the actual orbit of the sun, the ray of light, or the effect, does appear to us as a separate entity. And it can be appropriately be called a real entity. So to us, a ray of sun, the light of the sun, is an entity. We know we have rays of sun. We can feel it. We feel the heat. You can get burned. It helps plants grow. I mean, and if there's no sun, they die. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. So we know it exists, but it's only the effect of the actual cause. It's not even the cause itself. The cause is the orbit of the sun. All we're getting is the effect down here 93 million miles later. So when the ray of light leaves the sun's globe, it acquires its own identity as an effect. So when I think about walking outside, right, and it's warm or it's sunny, am I thinking the fact, the sun's right on top of me? Well, we say that, I mean, in sort of a cliche-like manner. I'm right on, the sun's right on top of you, but it happens to be 93 million miles away. True. And if you're in a hot spot, whatever it may be, you feel it even more so. The sun's not much closer to you, by the way, where it's hot than where it's not hot. Okay? Yes, at the equator, things are warmer in general, but typically speaking, the equator more or less keeps an even temperature throughout the entire year. I mean, candlelighting is almost the same whole year. It's very interesting. If you travel, there's not a lot of cities that sit literally on the equator. like the middle of the Amazon, you're like it's on the equator itself. But you go to Costa Rica, for example, which is south of the equator. So candle lighting is pretty close to being the same the entire year. Since it's not right on the equator, it changes a little bit. Let's say it's at 6:30 for argument's sake. At 6:30, almost the entire year, maybe it goes to 6:20 up to 6:40, but there's not a lot of change because it's literally very close to the equator, as would be the case with anything else that's close to the equator. But the temperature also is fairly consistent. It's a little humid, especially if you go to those areas, and it's whatever heat is. It's cold. It's not okay.
No, it is not. Go to Kiev, also the sun comes this way.
If you go to Kiev, you said.
Quito.
Oh, Quito in Ecuador.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it's also close to the equator.
Oh, very close.
Right. So it's the same concept. I mean, the sun's gonna be pretty warm, and basically sunset and sunrise will pretty much be almost the same time for most of the year. When the ray of light leaves the sun's globe, it actually acquires its own identity as an effect. This is not the case when it is in its source, which is the sun's globe. And Nefel of Shem Yesh Klal, where it could not be termed an entity at all. So on the orbit of the sun, the rays of the sun are not called an entity. There is no entity. They don't have an entity. It's just termed null and void because they're not identifiably different one for the next on the orbit of the sun or in the orbit of the sun. Because it really is null and void there, since all that is recognizable there is its source, the sun's globe, and that is the only thing apparent, nothing else. So if you were, for argument's sake, able to be on the face of the sun, which we couldn't, but let's say you could, like you can go to the moon. Man hasn't made it to Mars yet. They're still working on that, but nonetheless, let's assume you can make it to the sun, and you're able to sit on the sun, even though it's not a solid. But if you were able to do that, the sun's rays would not be identifiable to you on that sun. You couldn't separate ray A from B, from C, from D, etc. So the Tanya applies this illustration to our case. So similar in these ways, precisely both in image and likeness, mirroring the above analogy, page 44, of light rays losing their identity within the sun's globe. Are all creations voided of their separate identity by the flow of divine energy from the breath of his mouth? That's Hashem saying, let there be, whatever it is. Which flows through the creations, bringing them into their source, into being and is their source. And the creations themselves have no more identity than a light ray which emanates from the divine source of flow called the breath of God, which flows into and becomes embodied within them, transforming them from nothing to something. In other words, if Hashem did not utter that breath of life, okay, it's euphemistic, obviously Hashem doesn't breathe physically, but nonetheless, the term that's used, the reason it uses the term breathe is because if you look at the beginning of Genesis, when God created Adam, it says he breathed into him a breath of life, a soul, basically. So whatever, why does he use the term breathe? Because God doesn't have a mouth, doesn't have lungs. Because ultimately, when a person breathes in general, you're breathing from your essence, from your core, right? So if a person's out of breath, they can't function. If you're running, right? Why do you feel out of breath? Because that's your core. That's basically what's sustaining your whole body. God forbid a person's lungs shut down, then party's over. Okay? So when a person breathes, especially if you breathe deeply, it's coming from your essence, your core. That's the allegory, the association. So when God breathed, quote unquote, a soul into that of Adam, he breathed it from his essence, God's essence. That's the neshama, which we all have ultimately. And therefore, therefore their identity is voided in their source. Just like the sunlight within the globe of the sun, which has no separate identity, the nechshav lion vevis mamash is considered literally null and void. While it's in its source, it cannot be termed an entity at all, and only in the Earth's atmosphere down here Below the skies, where its source is not present, can it be called an independent entity? So our perception of the world is like the ray that has left the sun. We discern the existence of separate things, but in reality, the world's existence resembles the light ray inside the sun, which has no identity of its own and is absorbed in its source or cause. So, similarly, all the creations cannot be termed separate entities at all, other than to our physical eyes that do not perceive or grasp the spiritual source of these creations at all, which is the breath of God, which brings them into being. And that's why we see the creations as physical, material, and substantive, appearing as a real independent entity. Just as sunlight appears to be a real entity when it's outside its source. So now the fact that Hashem created us and thus sustained us, brought us to being from absolute nothingness, and is constantly sustaining us. The problem is, it's like that light of the sun. The rays of the sun come from the orb itself. We don't see that ray actually going all the way back 93 million miles. We know that it comes from there because science has figured that out, for whatever reason it may be. But that same concept applies, albeit spiritually, that there is this spiritual ray, for lack of a better term, that somehow is animating everything in this universe and thus enabling it to exist and giving it the appearance of an independent entity. Just like those rays of the sun look like are ultimately independent entities down here, not in their source itself on the sun. And therefore we or everything else that exists in this universe does not have an independent entity or identity in its source, which is or in self the infinite light of God.
So the rays somehow they must be different because we see a lot of different things and we have different souls. So
Talking about the rays of God.
The rays from Hashem. So he must be able. They're different. Each ray must be different.
They're different in the context of what's called tzimtzum. Remember, we learned about contraction, God concealing himself.
So it's the degree of contraction that
exactly
causes
because what, for example, I'll give you the example of machines. What one machine can handle in terms of electricity, another one cannot. So let's say you have something that's, I don't know, our plug's 100 and like 110, whatever, maybe 120. Okay, so if you go to Europe, they double that, they're 220. Right. Okay, but you have other voltages in our own country also, bigger machines that require 440 volts or whatever it may be. But if you have a machine that, if you have, let's say, an electrical line coming down that gives you 440 volts, and you plug in a 110 volt machine into it, it's going to explode. You'll fry it. Can't handle it. It requires it to be stepped down from 440 until it becomes an acceptable 110 or 120, whatever it may be. So in essence, the same thing applies with Hashem. God himself didn't change. The electrical power coming down is whatever it is. It doesn't change. Just because in our house, when you plug something in, the electricity has been stepped down to whatever voltage we need, it doesn't mean that at the power station, that also stepped down. It didn't. It didn't change over there. That's just a physical example. With Hashem doesn't change whatsoever from what he is in the heavens of heavens to what he is down here in our physical world. What happens is because of tzimtzum, God's contracting or concealing himself. So there's more concealment in some things and less concealment in other things. That's where the differences begin. So that's why you may feel or see more godliness, if you will, in certain places or certain experiences or certain people than you would otherwise with other things.
There's less concealment. Yeah.
There's less concealment to us. To God, nothing changed. To us, there's less yes.
So the difference between this bottle and this book is the amount of concealment.
Yes, and ultimately it's basically the amount of divine energy. In other words, that the water, for water to exist, in this case, requires that X amount of divine energy. For a book to exist in its state also requires X amount of divine energy. Whatever the energy, I don't have the energy charts, but you get the point that everything has, and it has the exact requisite amount necessary. The sun has a certain divine energy that enables it to rise every morning, whatever in the east and set in the west, and give off whatever sunlight is necessary. It's a creation of Hashem. Just like the sunlight is diffused, concealed, if you will, when it comes down to our planet Earth, relative to what it is in the orb, right? We couldn't handle that amount of light, that amount of intensity. So too with Hashem, godliness also becomes concealed. The actual orb, the God Himself, doesn't change whatsoever.
No.
Just by the time it comes down to us, let's say in the physical world we live in, some things look more godly, appear more godly, are more godly to us than others.
And what regulates the sin sun? What regulates
Hashem.
it?
Ultimately,
Oh, it
Hashem
does. So
initially regulates because everything needs its certain, is the amount of godliness that exists in everything is specific to that. So, for example, to mankind, the amount of godliness that we have to now enable humans to live is more overt to us than it would be in that of a stone. The stone also needs godliness to be able to exist. It couldn't exist either. But you don't see stones walking by themselves down the street. They're not animated that way, right? But it doesn't mean that God doesn't exist in the rock. He does. Even though we call it inanimate, but it still has godliness in it and thus enables it to live,
So
to exist.
He's able to
Hashem regulates, correct.
everything, all these.
He has
No.
he has all the books, the rules and regulations book, and that's how God,
That's
runs
his
the show.
So the concealment from Hashem to us, I'm talking about a human, us humans, I think we're human, can vary according to how we live our lives, mitzvot and
Yes.
Torah.
The amount of concealment varies, lesser or more. So for a person that's a tzaddik, let's say for argument's sake, learn in the beginning of Tanya about a tzaddik, someone who doesn't sin whatsoever, they've, for all intents and purposes, gotten rid of their evil inclination. Their relationship, their concept of godliness is much more poignant and far less concealed than it is to anyone else who's not a tzaddik. We just don't, we become numb to things.
Is
So
that something that we can try to determine? Can we move?
The answer is yes. Not necessarily to the level of a tzaddik.
No.
Most people will never become tzaddikim. But a Beinani,
Mhm.
that's why the book is called the
Yes.
Sefer Shel Beinani, the book of the Beinani, the beginning of Tanya, not this book, the original one.
Mhm.
Because in potential, every one of us can become a Beinani. A Beinani is still somebody who has an evil inclination. The difference is that they basically self-control their thought, speech, and action all the time. It doesn't mean they don't have temptations. They still do. But the moment the temptation rears its ugly head, the evil temptation that is, it shuts it down immediately. That's a tremendous amount of self-control. Is it doable? It's doable. Most of us are probably, I hate to break it to you, but most of us are probably not going to get there nonetheless. But the concept, concept, we can get there. Again, each person on their own level. Listen, if a person failed 9 out of 10 times in terms of their service of Hashem one day, and the next day they only failed 8 out of 10 times, that's progress. That's a 10% improvement, okay? Which is a big improvement. It may not come easily, and then the next day you build on that to, you failed only 3 out of 10 times, not whatever, or you succeeded 7 out of 10 times, so on and so forth. But that's up to us. It's hard work. It's like any discipline. If a person wants to be successful in something they do, whatever it is, choose what you want it to be. It requires self-discipline, not someone sitting there with a ruler. You know what I mean? That doesn't go over well with most people. Self-discipline is, I'm not here to bash other religions, but since you mentioned it, like Sharia law, for example, okay, within Islam, which is a much more radical level of Islamic law. So for some people, I guess it works. Probably more for the men than the women, be my guess. I can't speak from personal experience, but nonetheless, from the little I know about Sharia law. But that is, in certain countries, is imposed by either the death penalty if you don't observe it, death penalty, torture, death penalty. That's not because I want to do it, because I believe it, because I'm just afraid of getting caught by the Sharia police or whoever it may be. And if I do something wrong, and then they kill the person. I mean, it's not the place to discuss all the horrible things that they do to people if they don't follow lockstep. In some countries, is that the way? Is that a healthy approach to religion? In my unbiased opinion, I might say, I don't think so. I mean, I am a believer, obviously, of being observant as possible, religious and what have you. But I should be able to choose what I'm going to do without having the religious
Other
police, so to
people.
speak.
Other
Okay.
people.
Granted, they should be there to teach me, and I'm all for that, for teaching people.
Yeah.
And yes, I understand in
Not
school.
to dictate.
Okay, so in school, there's a little more regimented, like in any school. There's rules and regulations you have to observe. You want to stay in the school, you got to follow, you got to toe a certain party line. You don't toe the party line, then they throw you out of school. But that's true in any school. The difference is that they'll have different laws and rules, and maybe in a religious school than a non-religious school, different things. But in any place you go to, in any workplace, if you violate certain work laws, norms, then you're going to get fired or let go or ceremoniously lose your ID or whatever, however they're going to do it. Why? Because there's rules and regulations that have to be followed. In any healthy society, we need sets of laws. So maybe people may say, well, let me self-regulate. I don't need you to tell me what the law should be. You see how that works. You know what I mean?
We
Most of the
look
work.
What?
to the Torah, we look to, Hashem. And
We do.
we-
But if we didn't have that,
Mhm.
so the difference is that if, as a Jew, we view the Torah as being absolute. If there's nothing that's absolute, if you don't believe in anything as absolute, then it's completely subjective to what I believe, feel, don't believe, don't feel. And then you have a world of chaos.
Yeah.
Because it's my way or the highway, and you don't know what you're talking about. That
Mhm.
doesn't work well. You're not gonna make a lot of friends that way.
No.
Right? Now it doesn't mean I always live up to the,
No.
the ultimate level of living, but at least I know what it is.
Mhm.
Okay. And I'm a work in progress.
So, so when we do a mitzvah, Hashem sees that, he makes a connection, and he changes the amount of.
It's like we were removing veils that that exist between ourselves and God. Every time we do a mitzvah,
Right.
we're in a sense opening up, so to speak, opening up
But
that
he's
valve.
the one who does it.
Hashem's the one who
sees us
controls the
doing it,
valves.
And he opens it up.
It's true. So that's basically what happens when you do a mitzvah. And conversely, if a person sins, they're creating a distance, more of a distance between themselves and God. So this is where it's up to us. We can either have a closer, quote unquote, more open, closer, revelatory, a level of connection to Hashem, or one that's more concealed, more behel and beheser, as it's called, with hidden and concealed. All right, back to the text. We're midway down 45. So our physical illustration about the sun and the rays, however imperfect as the Tanya observes, there is, however, one respect in which our analogy does not appear to be a perfect reflection of what it attempts to represent. Why? Because in our analogy, the source, in this case the sun, is not actually present in the Earth's atmosphere or on the Earth. The sun is far and beyond the atmosphere. And it is only because the light is distant from its source that the light appears there on Earth as a separate entity. So if we were, for argument's sake, I don't know, say 10 miles from the sun's surface, you'd know exactly where that light's coming from. You'd see the sunlight coming off the sun. But 93 million miles away, we don't necessarily see. We know there's sunlight and light. We can't identify each. I don't think you could anyway, scientifically, each ray individually, unless there's some way to do that, and I'm wrong. But to the best of my knowledge, I don't know that that's even possible.
We can talk about the rays of the sun.
We do, but ultimately to be able to define each and every single ray as it comes, I don't know if that's possible scientifically, but we know it exists, and we believe it empirically that it exists. If you find anybody who tells you that the sun does not exist and there's no sunlight on our planet, then you should have them call the hotline. Okay, I'm sure there are, but conspiracy theorists. Many years ago, when I was a teenager, I remember I was in Boston. I think I was sick from school, and I had some people knock on my parents' door. So I was 16, 17, whatever it was. I opened the door. Who was it? I don't remember if they were Jehovah's Witnesses. There was some group out there that asked, "We're gonna need some paraphernalia." What was their pitch? Aren't you worried that the sun's going to run out of sunlight in X amount of years? I'm like, oh boy, yeah, this is terrible. Every day I worry about this, thinking the sun's going to run out of sunlight. Now, I don't know if there's any science behind that or not. I don't know, but I certainly didn't know at the time. And I said to him, listen, to be honest with you guys, it's not a concern I have. It's not. Bigger worries, bigger fish to fry in my life. One, I'm worrying whether the sun's going to run out of sunlight. But this is their whole campaign. Why? I have no clue. Okay. And somehow, I don't know if I was saved or whatnot because I didn't take the literature. I don't know. Anyway. This is not true, however, in reality, where all the creations are continually within their source, which is God. That's us or whatever, anything in our universe. It is only that the source is not visible to the eye. So our analogy depicts a shift from an effect absorbed in its cause, which is a light ray inside the sun, to the effect's emergence from the cause to become a separate entity, a light ray on Earth. Okay, cause sun, effect light ray. But nothing ever leaves the presence of God. God's always here. It's not like the orb of sun. Yes, the sun itself is 93 million miles away. God is not just, I don't know how you would define how many miles away that is. God is right here as he is 100 million miles away or whatever. Our eyes may perceive that to be the case, but it does not reflect actual reality. In the Tanya's analogy, we are all raised inside the sun's globe, inside, not outside, inside the sun's globe. We are an effect, but not one which has departed from its cause. Mm-hmm. So, yes, there's a connection in the analogy of the sun and the sunlight. The difference is that we, our neshamas, our soul, ourselves, are still in the orbit of the sun. It's not like we've departed from the orbit of the sun. So why then are all creations not voided of their identity by the source which is present? It's like we're in the orbit of the sun. How come we still have an identity? But to answer this question, we first need to clarify another matter in the following chapter. Leaves you hanging. So Tanya ends this chapter with a hanging question. This is unusual, as Hasidic texts prefer not to shed doubt on matters of faith, leaving them unanswered. In this case, however, it's not God's existence that's being questioned, but our own existence. If we are, quote, all within God, like rays of sun in the sun, how do we possibly have any existence at all? Over such an ego-deflating question, that Tanya is happy for us to ponder for a while. Yes. Just to give you a little taste, the next class we're going to discuss the various names of Hashem. Okay, you have Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, the Tetragrammaton. You have the name Elokim. Mm-hmm. So it says Kishem Omagen Hashem Elokim, that the name of God, Hashem Elokim, acts like a shield on the sun. We're going to explain what that means, practically speaking. But there's various names of God, and on certain levels of godliness here, we're like absolute nothingness. But then you come to levels of godliness where there's more concealment of God, like the name Elokim, which was used to create the world, Breshit bara Elokim. So that enables things to have a self-identity from that level of godliness. On higher levels of godliness, you're right, there's absolutely no identity whatsoever. But Hashem created it in a certain way. There's a method to the madness. Okay, yes. It's not just that God threw darts inside wherever they landed. That's okay. Let's see what happens. Everything is planned to the T and run by Hashem to the T. Yeah. So, I'll just conclude with the following. Even though often people will say, those who do not believe in God and or the Torah will tell you, well, science says. Science says, whoever Mr. or Mrs. Science is, but science says, and they go on from there. So that's great, and many things can be explained based on science, which helps us relate to whatever it may be. But then there's certain steps that come before what science says, and science doesn't know the answer to that, certainly as of yet, and likely some things they will never know based on science. Because science can only take you so far. Can only take you as far as the human mind allows it to be taken. What happens beyond the human mind? Are we the beginning and end all of everything? Or are there things beyond our understanding, our comprehension? Science can't understand what's inexplicable or not understandable by a mind, by human beings, because ultimately, who studies science? It's not the cats and dogs running around outside. True? So, yes.
Usually, the next event that happens, the next flourish, find and something, is usually tapped out or negated by the current scientists because I was amazed when I got to science how I found that out. Like whoever was putting out the next step, saying this is possible, you'd be like, no, it's not. No, it's not.
They're
You
labeled
think
as
they
the
would
Mavericks.
be open, but they were all negating. And I mean, I see it time and again I've read in our history of science. And so they're not even on board until someone then proves it. So it's really beyond.
It's true. You're absolutely right. If you're not towing the party line, even within science,
Yes, that's what
you're
I'm saying.
labeled as a maverick, and you're basically
Yeah.
outside. You're a crazy man or whatever.
Yeah,
Why?
they did science.
And you might have a PhD in whatever it is, but sorry, you're just a little loony. I mean, what you're saying is not true. You have scientists who are creationalists. Okay, they believe in the concept of creation, not evolution, not the Big Bang. What are they labeled as? They're not mainstream science. Now, you're going to say, well, they couldn't be scientists. Well, they are scientists. They have the same degree as many other scientists who don't believe in creation and the like. That falls in line with what Torah says. Okay, but it's not, they can't empirically prove it. So, I mean, I don't know that everything in science can be probably not, is not empirically proven either. That's why they're called the theories of, that's the word theory beforehand. There's a reason why it's not the fact of such and such, it's a theory of. Because there's an assumption, which is probably true. At some point, you're going to come up with something else, which is totally going to blow to pieces whatever we believe to be empirically true. We found some new concept. It may have taken 100 or 1,000 years, and whatever we thought was empirical truth, and realized that has nothing to do with reality. That was not true to start with. It's happened in science time and time again, and it continues to happen. So what we thought to be the impossible becomes possible. What we thought to be the possible becomes the impossible. Whatever. In my free time, maybe I'll go for my PhD in science. Maybe not this week, but maybe a different week.
Astronomy.
What?
Maybe astronomy.
Astronomy, astrology, superstring theory, something really has meaning.
What's your father's degree?
He was a physicist. Yeah, I'm not likely to get my PhD in physics this week or next week. So I don't know if I can handle it. I'm back to school for how many years? A lot of years. What? I happen to enjoy science on a personal note, and I don't have the math background at all to understand physics in its in its essence. But the scientific end of it, if you can separate the two of them, I certainly hadn't. I grew up with it. I mean, I had an appreciation for it when I was a kid, and I still do. Nature of the world and the like. The math and I had we had a strained relationship. It's got like the algebra, the two and trade. I'm like, why? I mean, some of my brain just was not computing. I can figure it out, but it just didn't speak to me. What can I tell you? So, like being a theoretical mathematician would never happen.
Do you think when you retire, you would take on different
You're
interests?
retiring.
They don't have much of a retirement package about here. You saw, I'm not sure what the board voted in or not, but pretty sure there is no retirement package. So I don't see retirement anytime. No, if you saw the video, we showed a little clip of it at the party my wife went. So the Rabbi was emphatically clear about not retiring. I mean, you understand you can change your job, you need to do something. Okay, even if you have to slow down. When a person totally retires, they basically lose a feeling of purpose in life, and that's not healthy for anybody. I don't care how old you are. It's just not healthy. Even if a person is 90 years old and they don't have a lot of energy, but they can do something meaningful, even if it's small.
You could retire from one thing and go on to something.
I have a lot of things I would like to do, honestly, but no one else has offered to run the show here yet. So they're happy to do what they're doing, like paying the bills, the illustrious part of the job. You know what I'm saying? Fundraising. Nobody's raised their hand. I don't know why. It's such a great, opportunity.
It's not just. I see this with scientists too. I sort of ago. Those guys, they didn't retire. They just. My sister is now helping out. He's also actually got everything. I think it's in chemistry Nobel Prize, and she's been helping his family with him. He's 103. He still goes every day. He's still on the computer. He's, scientists don't.
It's
stop.
true.
So when it's your calling, and that's what I think with you, it's your calling. It's not something.
She's saying the retirement's out the
You're
window.
not retiring.
Well,
It's
There
basically
goes
what's the
that
next
idea.
class you're gonna teach.
No, you didn't what your father
My
wanted, but
father
didn't make it.
honestly
He
was
he
not.
wanted to be in yeshiva, and Rabbi told him you will bring more. who you described with the 3-letter after your name.
No,
And
that,
that's why you
that
did
is
what you
true,
did.
but I opted out of the PhD part of it. Did go to school for a few other odds and
It
ends.
doesn't mean.
No, I have plenty of other things I'd like to do within the context of Chabad Shlichus. But one day I'd like to write a book if that ever happens. I don't know, but in concept, that's I have to figure that out first. Is that important? I always come up with a title. Tanya, no, this mind and writing Tanya are not. No, sorry, I am not nearly that gifted. Not even remotely close. All right, folks on Zoom, we're zooming out. Have a good night.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. All the best.
You too.
Take care. Have a good night. We'll see you mañana a la mañana.